everybody, welcome back to the Open Source Summit in Denver, and we're talking with Clyde Seepersad, who's General Manager of Linux Training for the Linux Foundation, or training in general across the board. And they've got a new report out talking about what is the current state of tech talent. And so give us some of the highlights of that, some of the things that you found, and you've been doing this for a while, so what surprised you?
Yeah, sure. First off, thanks for having me, Mike. Always great to be able to get on platform and talk a little bit about the work that we're doing at LF Education. We've been doing this for several years. It used to be called the Open Source Jobs Report. And a few years ago, we thought, every job is an open source job in tech. So let's just broaden the lens a little bit. And, this year, of course, we focused in a little bit more keenly on the AI topic, which is sucking all the oxygen out the room. And we wanted to understand from practitioners, if you back away from the hype, what's really on their mind. And, it turns out what's really on their mind is this realization that I think the stat is like 96 or 97% of organizations see that there's potential significant value in AI. A lot of them are realizing that to get that value unlocked, you have to go through your people. And you have to cross-train and upskill your people because you can't outsource your AI strategy because it's fundamentally about business processes. And so I think the impact that has is there's been a lot of stuff in the popular press around concern for jobs, entry-level developers, and what are the impacts going to be. And that's true. But if you take a bigger lens picture of what's going to happen and how the sort of deck chairs get rearranged, there are going to be significant pockets where there's going to be the need for more technical talent at the people level in order for organizations to unlock the potential value. And organizations are realizing and saying, I think it's truthful in saying that they need to invest more in technical talent in order to unlock AI. So, and I think we titled the report about something about the vibe versus the reality. And part of the reality that the data is saying is, as that first wave of enthusiasm and maybe panic has sort of washed over, the real work of what is it going to take to get there is coming into focus. And a lot of that's going to have to be using the folks who we have, who understand the organization, the processes, the customers, to figure out how we add these tools in to drive productivity.
You mentioned new jobs, new skills, new areas. Are there any that are becoming apparent to you where we might have new roles and new opportunities for people in the age of AI?
Yeah, I think it's more the intersection of rules, right? And so we already know from the DevOps revolution that it broke down the wall that we used to have between the dev side of the house and the engineering side of the house. I think what we're seeing with AI is it's breaking down the wall between the tech side of the house and the business side of the house. So if you think about what it takes to build a really good agent, it's not all about the technology. It's very deeply about what the process is and what the outcome is we're trying to achieve. And so I suspect what we're going to see, yes, maybe fewer entry-level jobs for software developer because a lot of that stuff is quite good with the agentic coding, and maybe more opportunities of people who come in with some technical talent, but also are upskilled on the business so that they understand how are we using these tools, what are we using these tools to accomplish. So I think the early read is there's going to be more of these, I think the term is like T-shaped folks, right? They're deep in one area, but they understand across the business because that understanding across the business is going to be important because you need that to unlock the power of what you can get with the agentic models. So I think the nature of the rules, right? They're becoming these broader rules because you're going to need access to that broader set of things instead of, like historically, we've gotten super comfortable, right? I mean, you remember there was a time when you could train to be a database person and do that for 30 years and then hang it up and leave. And we've known that that's been gone for a while. Mm-hmm. I think what we're seeing now is you kind of have to not just get across the different technical functions, but you have to start reaching out across into the business and really understanding that very deeply.
And yet I still see DBAs out there, so who knows?
Listen, there are still QA folks out there, so it's a long tail.
To your point, though, not just the way our jobs are going to change, but the organization itself may change as well. Because if all these silos become fungible, then the separation of roles between, say, sales and marketing and customer service and all these things that we've structured the companies around forever, might that also change in a way that the new job functions will be cross-discipline, to your point, and the way the organization is structured needs to change too.
I suspect that's right. And I was saying this in a talk yesterday. We're in an uncomfortable time right now because we all had playbooks that we were pretty comfortable with, and we understood how they work, and you came in at this level and you progressed to that level, and there was career tracks. And that's kind of gotten set on fire, and now we're all trying to collectively figure out what do the new playbooks look like in this sort of cross-functional, T-shaped world. And I think the answer is we don't know, and the fact that we don't know is creating a lot of anxiety, which is natural. I think part of the coaching we're trying to give folks is take a breath. It's okay to be anxious. We're figuring out the new playbook. We have a sense that it's going to be this multidisciplinary approach. I don't think anybody has figured out exactly what that looks like, but it's not the approach we were using 3 years ago, right? It's going to have to be something quite different when we think about how do we bring the power, the context about the business is not captured in any models. But it's going to be critical to unlocking the power of the models, right? That the new playbooks are still very much being written.
Have you seen any generational divide here in how we're thinking about AI? Because, I mean, I can talk to folks in their 20s, and some of them will say, well, this is great. AI will empower me to do all kinds of stuff that I previously would have had to have 10 years of experience to do. Others in that same age bracket are saying, I'll never get a job in this field because I can't break in because all the entry-level tasks are now being automated, and they feel a little bit stuck. On the other hand, the older folks are standing around going, ranging from, this is a conspiracy to eliminate my job to this is going to be great because now I don't have to hire a bunch of entry-level minions to do stuff. I can just have the AI agent do that for me, and in their minds, it will benefit them more.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely what we're seeing. I'll start on the first one. I do think there is a significant divide among the entry-level folks coming in terms of their tolerance for ambiguity. The folks who can deal with ambiguity and figure out kind of where they're going to skate to and what they're passionate about are the first group of people you're talking about that are seeing it as opportunities. I think the folks who are anxious in the face of uncertainty because they want somebody to tell them exactly what to do are going to have a lot of trouble. We are entering an age now where you have to be flexible, you have to be nimble, and it's frustrating for young professionals because it used to be that you could get in and you can build up a certain level of competence and expertise, and that then felt like a safe cushion to sit on. The reality is, as a slight overstatement, by the time you get to be an expert on something, it's probably no longer relevant. It's just moving so fast. And so this idea of like never being comfortable in your mastery is a very different way of kind of existing in your career. And I think you and I are maybe further along, so we probably won't have as much runway to deal with it. But I tell my kids who are teenagers, this is what's going to be. You're gonna have to just be constantly evolving your skill set, and if you can wrap your head around that, you're going to do fine. If you are panicked by that, it's going to be tough sledding.
My son was on a job interview recently, and he was talking about the job, and I asked him, well, you're worried about, what AI might do to that particular field, and he looked at me and he rolled his eyes and he said, Dad, if I got to worry about AI all the time, I'll never get out of bed. So
right. He's on the right track, right? And then I think from the mid-career and later professionals, there's also this disconnect between the folks that feel like they've earned their stripes, they came up through, they're maybe slightly annoyed at just how good the models are at sort of digesting and analyzing the sort of state of knowledge. I suspect some of them are a little bit over-indexed on, I'll never need to hire an entry-level person again. I just had a plumber out to my house at $125 an hour. The guy is 62, and he said he'll never retire because he has more work than he can ever possibly do because there are no 20-year-old plumbers, right? If you break the on-ramp of talent, like it's great for a while, and then it stops being great for the customers, and it starts being great for the folks who are left.
We might have a robot for that job.
Yeah, well, not sure how I feel about letting a robot mess with my plumbing, but that's a whole other question. But I think everybody's adjusting, right? And I think it's the folks who are in the middle of organizations are the ones caught in the pincher, right? Because the board members are like, oh, this is great. You should triple your productivity. Just use the AI. Of course, there's no one thing that is AI. And then you've got the folks at the entry level, some are panicked and some are excited. And the folks at the, in the middle of the org are the ones have to sort of bridge the gap between the two.
Yeah, because I do feel like there's a certain amount of noise coming from the C-suite execs about, we're going to improve productivity, we're going to reduce headcount and all this other stuff. And as I listen to them, I can't help but wonder, most of them are going to wind up hiring people back because they don't really understand exactly how the thing that they're working through actually works.
It's going to play out. I saw a great stat the other day. In the US, in the 60 years following World War II, productivity increased on average by 2.5% a year. Starting in 2000, that number dropped to 1.4%. If you remember the hype back then, turns out the internet made us less productive. We somehow lost ground. I think the AI tools have the potential to kind of get that productivity number back up. If done right, the trick is how do you do it right, right? Doing it right is going to require leveraging everybody in your organization because it is fundamentally about looking at your company and figuring out how can we use these tools to make better decisions faster? How can we use these tools to get stuff out to our customers that is better mapped to what their needs are and have more feedback? Some of that's data, a lot of that is judgment, and a lot of that is knowledge, right? And so figuring out the people part of that. I think Boston Consulting Group had this great framework out. They're calling it 10-20-70. 10% is about the tools, 20% is about the processes, 70% is about the people. We're super excited about the tools and everybody's talking about them. It's 10% of the challenge.
Right. I mean, I was having this conversation with one of my neighbors and he was pointing out they had bought a manufacturing facility in Vietnam 10 years ago and there were 300 people working at it. And they have since tripled the output from that factory, but there's still 300 people working there. And his point was, we increase productivity, but we'd rather increase the productivity and the revenue, and then it's not just about reducing headcount per se, unless, that may be a byproduct, but maybe not the primary goal.
Well, I don't think anybody can point to a company that ever shrank its way to greatness.
Mm-hmm.
It's about growth, right? And it's about figuring out what more can we do.
So, from your estimation, what is real in terms of the capabilities of AI co-pilots and now agents versus how much remains theoretical, and what's the timeline spectrum in your mind?
Oh, well, the timeline's a tricky one, but I will say what's real is I have a old friend who has long-time contact center manager, and they have significantly reduced their tier one staffing out of the Philippines because a lot of the questions that people call in to ask for, the typical things that will go to a tier one desk, are actually really good to put into agentic model form because it's very well described transactions. Right? I want to reset my password, I forgot my login, I need a refund. So there are things like that where you've already seen pretty significant movement sort of in the real world. I think we're starting to see on the code development side much faster velocities, right, of people being able to. Nobody enjoys the mundane part of the coding where you're stitching services together, right? Almost nobody. So if you can accelerate through that bit of sort of assembling the blocks of code and you can spend more of your time thinking about what's the new functionality you're trying to create, I don't think you'll find a lot of people saying, oh, no, I really like typing line by line, all that code. So I think that's real. I think the velocity argument is real. There may be some people who are feeling like they could be comfortable with largely model-generated code. I would argue most people are not, and they still want sort of human review and guidance in that process. So there's something real there. I think the trick is figuring out what does that look like. Is it a velocity increaser that looks more like your factory example where you do more? Are there some opportunities to pare back on kind of what the on-ramp of talent looks like? The on-ramp of talent doesn't go to zero because there's no business in the world that can sustain that. So I think there's some basic stuff. The more interesting thing is when you get into the more, the meat of the organizations, right? Most things in organizations aren't as simple as reset my password. You're talking about dealing with suppliers, you're talking about dealing with customers, you're talking about dealing with multiple departments across your own organization. There's a lot of context and a lot of process and a lot of organizational dynamics at play. That's going to take real work. And that's not work about, is it MCP or A2A? That's work about the horse trading that happens within an organization as you rework processes. So it's not about the tools. The tools have a ton of potential, right? They're very good at inference. They're very good at analyzing yesterday's data. They're not good at envisioning the future because they're trained on yesterday's data. So, if you go back 20 years, one of these tools probably wouldn't suggest the iPhone because there was no data suggesting that, that sort of unique combination of factors, right? So innovation, a lot of the core innovation, I think, is the human spark layered on top of great analytics. The analytics piece, the tools are exceptionally good at.
And to use your call center analogy, I'm not quite clear where those agents are going to be because I can see the call center people are going to build their agents and they expect humans to interact with that, but I got news for them. My agent's just going to scan their site to find what I want to have in the first place and bypass their agents.
It's going to be very interesting to see how that one plays out.
So, or maybe those two agents will talk to each other somehow or other and share something interesting. Clearly, everybody who's hiring anybody is looking for people who have AI skills. What's your best advice about how to go get those AI skills? Because I think everybody kind of nods their head and says, yes, AI skills, but then they don't know where to put their arms around that.
It's a great question, Mike, and it's something I've been saying for a couple of years now. Technical talent is something you should build, not buy. I think a lot of hiring managers got into this mindset that I'll hop on LinkedIn, I'll find some candidates, I'll hire somebody, and it'll be great. First off, that is a circular firing squad because I poach from you, you poach from him, he poaches from me, and we haven't added any new talent. Secondly, it is logically impossible to hire somebody with 3 years of agentic AI model building. And so this desire, we always want to hire the person that trained up on somebody else's dime.
You haven't seen that ad for 10 years of experience, AI agentic?
Yeah, exactly, right? So I think everybody's is realizing that the easy way out, which is to hire somebody that learned it somewhere else, is a logical impossibility. And that leaves you with one choice. The people I have are going to be the people that I have to rely on. And so how do I systematically invest in training and upskilling those people? And, one of the things that was interesting in the research report was it wasn't just that people were saying AI skills, although that was the highest on the list. It was like some 2/3. More than half of people said we're short on cybersecurity. We're short on cloud native basics. We're short on DevOps and pipelines and the mechanics to sort of push stuff through. And I think that's part of what we've been playing back to folks is you can chase the hot, sexy stuff to say, well, we got to do some A2A, we got to do MCP, so we can build agents that talk to agents that manage other agents. Fundamentally, this stuff is going to run on the infrastructure we have, which is this sort of cloud native architecture. It would behoove people to focus on making sure folks understand the basics because the abstract layer tools are going to keep coming super fast. They're going to keep running in our data centers where Linux is the command line and Kubernetes is the orchestration layer and Prometheus is doing logging. It's a learn to read and write approach, right? Of saying, listen, you don't know what this is going to be, but we know what this is going to be. Make sure folks are comfortable here and make sure you're exposing them to all the new stuff that's coming out. Because it's every week. You know this, Mike. It's every single week more stuff comes out, but the base layer doesn't change.
Yeah, well, we also know there's going to be a lot more of this up here, and this down here isn't going to get that much bigger and better anytime soon.
It's not sexy, but it's what we run on, right? So making sure everybody knows what you run on feels like a pretty good strategy if you're going to bet the business on this new family of technologies.
So let me ask you, who's responsible for training? And I'm asking this question because if I go talk to some of the attendees, they'll say they work for certain companies because they give them access to training. Right. Other companies expect the employee to kind of stay current, and it's up to them and to get that training somehow themselves. So how do you navigate those two extremes? Because it seems like both parties expect the other to be doing something.
My argument to organizations is if you think, as 97% of people do, that there's going to be this significant win from implementing these technologies, and you realize that the only way you're going to get that win is by relying on the people within your organization to figure out how to correctly use these tools, how to be privacy respecting, how not to give away all your intellectual property, how to do it in a way that doesn't land with horrible backlash from your customers. if you think that's going to be what's required, but on the other hand, you say, well, they should figure it out themselves. They're grown people. That's probably not going to end well for you, right? Like you'd never do that in any other aspect of your business. You'd say, this is critically important. I want to have a clear plan and a strategy and alignment around how I'm doing this. Upskilling your technical talent is no different than any other strategic initiative, right? If you think it's strategic, you have to act like it's strategic. And if companies don't, and they instead say, well, but the people should be responsible for themselves, I think what you're going to start seeing is the performance diverging between the organizations that take seriously the 10-20-70 rule and the organizations that are still suspicious that if people train up, they're really training up because they're trying to leave to move to some other place, right? And so if this is your strategy, you should align your strategy. And if your strategy requires people who understand the tech and are comfortable working in it, and you don't make that a priority across your organization to do it consistently, I don't think you can expect it to be as successful as those who make that commitment.
All right, folks, you heard it here. A wise man once said, failing to plan is planning to fail.
Right.
Still true in the age of AI. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks so much, Mike.
All right.